Do your end users always, and I mean always, without exception, work on company-owned devices and IT-approved apps? I didn't think so. So my next question is, how do you keep your company's data safe when it's sitting on all those unmanaged apps and devices? 1Password has an answer to this question: Extended Access Management. 1Password Extended Access Management helps you secure every sign-in for every app on every device because it solves the problems traditional IAM and MDM can't touch. Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Allie Mellon joins us today to talk about automation, AI, data management, and EDR evaluations. Hopefully we'll get to all those. Allie is a principal analyst at Forrester Research and seems to dislike BS as much as I do, which is why I like talking to her and reading her blogs. Welcome to the show, Allie.
Thank you so much for having me back. Nice to see you all.
Likewise.
Nice to see you as well. So yeah, I'm kind of excited. This whole episode is kind of focused on the SOC, on security operations. Well, not just SOC, but and the industry, is kind of hyper focused on that at the moment. So Allie, you're in a good spot. Everybody seems to have latched on to generative AI. ChatGPT was released just over 2 years ago. I think November was the second year anniversary there. And we just saw an absolute explosion in companies focused on trying to use Gen AI to automate parts of the SOC. And personally, I always saw the SOC as kind of a symptom of a problem in the first place. Like we created these SIM products, that just spew out mountains of data, which created the need for a bunch of humans to sort it all out, right? And that's kind of. Yeah, I think I set up my first SIM in 2004. And, the first thing I did was shove every log from everything that RSA had a parser for into RSA Envision. And, then it was like, we had 100 million events coming in per day. And I was like, well, shit, like, what do I do now? like I had no plan for it. Like I had no outcomes I was looking for. And I just shoved everything in it. And all of a sudden it was all we could do to just keep the thing running, just keep it up, keep storage from filling up. And every day, we're not getting Linux logs anymore. I talked to the Linux admins, they blew away the syslog.conf and forgot to add us back in. So now we're missing 2 weeks of Linux logs. Every day it was something, it was 1,700 devices reporting in there. So kind of fast forward to today, we're still dealing with this fire hose of information. If anything, it feels like we have more of these busy work generators that just kind of spew out stuff that we expect the buyer to then hire a bunch of people to handle all that. So I mean, that's kind of how I see it. Coming up through my career, and I'm curious. You were looking at the space before ChatGPT, right? Before everybody started piling AI on it. How have you seen this market kind of evolve?
Yeah. Well, first off, I just need a minute to recover from all the trauma dumping you just did about your SIM experience 20 years ago.
It was trauma dumping. It was.
But it's okay because it's very relatable and we've all been there. So I appreciate that. Thank you for sharing. But no, yeah, I mean, I've been with Forrester for 4 years now, a little over 4 years. So I have seen a lot of this. And to be honest, in the 2 years it's been since ChatGPT came out, I mean, it's actually like a very fast 2 years, but also a very slow 2 years at the same time. The days are short, the minutes are long, but it's been really interesting to see how little it has actually changed the SIM market. That's the thing. I hate to say it, but you know what? I just haven't found it to be very useful to have a little chatbot to talk to in my SIM. It just hasn't been everything that I wanted it to be. And so to be honest, while in some ways it has been extremely helpful, in most of the ways that it was marketed, it has not. The ways that it has helped is in a couple of areas, right? The first is definitely incident report writing. That's great. That's such a good use case, especially of LLMs. Makes things so much faster and so much easier. In incident summarization as a part of that as well. And in script analysis. That's another big one. The other thing that's interesting is like query language translation. But to be honest, that's only very useful for people who are newer to the field. everybody who really knows what they're doing in KQL or SPL, they got very specific things they want to do. They're usually very complex things. And at a certain point, the tools are not going to help you with that. And you kind of have to be writing those yourself. The other area that's really funny that I love to see that's really good is for translation of human language. So say you got a team in Japan that would much prefer to get their questions answered in Japanese. You can now do that with some of these tools. So I love that use case because I think it's just so helpful to be more inclusive of people's first languages. But as far as transformational, going to address some of the biggest problems with the SIM, we're still not there.
And just to point out, like all those things that you mentioned, and I like that you mentioned some positive things that it can do. This isn't going to be all negative. Like I don't need it to live in the sim to do any of that stuff, do I? Like I can just take a $20 a month ChatGPT license, and it can help me with scripts. It can help me with translation. It can help me with all that stuff, right? And as kind of a follow up question to that, is this not as useful because it's something that's additive, not subtractive? Because it seems like the promise is we're going to make things easier, but we didn't take away anything that you're currently doing. We gave you, in fact, an additional thing that requires an additional step, and no steps were taken away.
Well, to your first question on does it have to live in the SIM, it definitely doesn't, because every other security tool that you're using also has their own version of it, their own version of a Copilot built in. So you can find it in other places. I will say it's a bit different from just having a license for ChatGPT because of the specific security use cases that a lot of these LLMs that are built into the tools can accomplish. It only goes so far as to how much better that is. But it does give some more specific use cases down into security. My hope, my sincere hope, is that over time, we're going to be able to more closely fine tune those models and have a series of agents that are able to accomplish specific tasks that are only built to accomplish specific tasks. And those will be specific enough where you can't just go to ChatGPT for that answer. It's not going to be the same level. You had a second question, but my brain can only do things one at a time.
Yeah,
so what was the question?
Yeah, that's on me. About it being additive, not subtractive, right? Like, and I think you kind of answered it with the agents, right? Like it needs to be, but yeah, I just hate when somebody like tries to sell me on, hey, we're going to make your life easier. Here's an extra. In fact, I have a short story I can tell. I used to be a PCI QSA. And when doing PCI, there's like over 200 rules, and you have to manage over 1,000 pieces of evidence. Some of those rules might require 5 or 6 pieces of evidence. And we used to do it all with spreadsheets and just folder structure, right? Requirement 1 folder. Underneath that, you got requirement 1.1.1, 1.1.2, and that's where we would put our screenshots and our router configs and stuff like that as an auditor for that. And somebody said, you know what, we're going to make your life easier. We're going to give you a portal, the web application. You're going to put all this in. So now those thousands of pieces of evidence, one by one, I had to upload them into a portal instead of just dragging and dropping them into folders. And each upload took like 5 seconds. And when you're doing that 1,000 times, like I never got through a single engagement with that before I said, you know what, you're going to have to add 20 hours to every PCI engagement, because that's how much extra time it's going to take me to use your time-saving portal.
It's such a great example, because I do think that we saw this with the internet, and now we're seeing it with AI. It's a solution looking for a problem in many cases. Mm-hmm. And that's been kind of the interesting thing over the last 2 years. A lot of people have asked me, like, are we reaching the peak of what we're going to see with this technology? And I think we haven't even begun to see the actual peak of what this technology can do, because we've been too busy just trying to get it into the tools so that we can say that we have the shiny new toy, as opposed to making sure it's really useful. And I expect that the next few years are going to be where we start to see the real innovation and the really cool use cases. Because while I prefer to think of myself as a realist with this, I am very skeptical of it. I do really think it's cool. I'm a technologist at heart. I think that the technology is really interesting and they're doing some really cool things with it. And I do think that there are areas where it can significantly enhance what we're doing in security operations. We're just not there yet.
Well, I always wonder how the economics of this work out, right? Because I've never met a SaaS vendor that was like, you know what I would like is negative net dollar retention next year. Like if we could go for like a 80, that would be great. And realistically, we've built this whole SaaS economy on paying for ingestion and compute. And what most SOCs want is less data, like more like what would really be helpful is automatic aggregations and correlations and things that make my data more efficient. But I doubt we're going to see the same vendor making money on ingesting your terabytes of data deploy an AI bot that's going to help you reduce the amount of data you're putting into their tool. Or if they are, that AI bot is going to cost you just as much or ideally more than what the data you're saving does, right? I mean, it's just, we have the whole economy for this is set up to be this never ending treadmill of more and more and more and more and more data. So yeah, I think there has to be a reckoning at some point, right? But I always wonder how that's going to shake out because we're just like, nobody in this business is set up to do the right thing. Uh, when the right thing is that we are spending too much on these tools, putting too much data in them. And that's not to even start with, I am shocked at how few questions companies ask about what happens to the data they put into these tools, even when it's hosted by your SIM, even when it's hosted by your your integration company, because that data is being processed probably not through your cloud servers, probably through theirs. And I don't know that everybody's reading that fine print to really understand if you're putting, sensitive logs through some of these co-pilots, what the risk of that is.
Yeah, I think the transparency there is really, really important. And that was one of the things that early on with ChatGPT, we were actually really happy to see at Forrester was if you looked at ChatGPT's website, the first thing there was security, reliability, trust, which I think is really important and has to be lived in the products that come out of that technology as well, down to the co-pilot levels. And it does depend on the vendor that you're talking to, the level of transparency or even the level of understanding that they have of what they're doing with that data, which is far more concerning. Whether or not
Especially when
they
they're using, everybody's using one of like four back end tools,
Models.
right? And so
Yeah.
these vendors sometimes they don't even understand the data they're collecting, right? It's crazy.
It is.
Yeah, it's. I think every AI evaluation framework I've seen features transparency. Like that's a key one in there. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I am curious to see how that changes because one of the things that I'm looking at a lot this year, especially when it comes to some of these tools, is okay, we've built a bunch of tools that we are marketing to people who are newer in the industry, even though these tools are not always accurate. And then when I ask vendors, okay, so how do you measure the efficacy of these tools? How do you measure they're actually giving the right output and a valuable output? And they say, well, we have a thumbs up and thumbs down on the response. But you're sending the response to a new person. How are they supposed to know whether it's good or bad? And you're saying you're going to have them be trained on this information. So it's kind of it creates a difficult scenario because right now many vendors do not have a means to judge the output of the technology that they're building and to make sure that it is correct, except for relying on the customer, which is a lot to put on a customer and a user. And so I would love to see more transparency around determining efficacy of the output and also making sure that that output is really valuable to the user that it's going to, not just that it's accurate.
A robust
like a
feedback, like thumbs up, thumbs
Yeah.
down doesn't say not just relying on a new person to spot what's wrong, but to tell you what should have happened instead. They don't know.
Yeah.
They know it's not working. That's what they know. So I
Yeah.
think, a thumbs up or thumbs down is not sufficient user feedback to be able to actually tune those models to make the right recommendations in the future.
Right. And a lot of it, like the key thing you need is what is the thing you were trying to do? Like I learned that very early on. I did internet tech support very early on, and people will tell you what they're having a problem with, and you always have to back up to, okay, what was it that you were trying to do in the first place? And you find like the data they're feeding you, what they're actually telling you is not useful at all in you being able to troubleshoot or solve their problem, because they don't know how to state the problem correctly. They don't know how to write a bug report or do the verbal equivalent of writing a good bug report.
Yeah, and that's the other interesting thing here is that even for the teams that are using it and getting value, the feedback that I've gotten is it's great, except it doesn't know our incident response processes. It doesn't know our business challenges specifically. And without that information, it's only going to get you so far, right? One of the reasons why it's been at least a little bit helpful for developers and people working on software is because it can output some pretty standard code. And that's great because there are so many circumstances where you just need some standard code to start and as
mediocre.
a basis.
Give me mediocre all day long.
You don't need that in security. You need very, very specific solutions for very, very specific problems that are always business specific. And so if you end up in that type of situation, like how useful is this really going to be if we can't give it business specific information?
Yeah. Yeah, I always think of AI in these cases like the automatic defibrillators, the automated ones. Like they're great. If I'm having a heart attack, an automated defibrillator is better than no defibrillator because I'm not at a hospital. But I still probably, if I had a choice, would opt for a doctor using a defibrillator on me at a hospital if that's a choice. So I think, and Adrian said this at the very beginning, but at the end of the day, we're still talking about triaging symptoms of problems. A SIM is a place you gather all of the information and symptoms of a problem. It's not where the problem happens. 85% of the time it's happening at the endpoint. And so we're still just trying to figure out how to have someone sitting in in the passenger seat with us putting fires out, not why people keep starting fires in the first place. And so, I like, Allie, do you think the Holy Grail is eventually a co-pilot that says, hey, dummy, don't put that SSN into generative AI instead of flags and analysts that somebody just compromised PII? Because to me, that's like, security is a people problem. If people would quit doing and clicking and configuring things in a idiotic way, we wouldn't have 80% of our issues. So like, what is the holy grail of AI that, in the best way it can be applied to security?
Ooh, that AI can be applied to security. That's interesting. I mean, I always think that there will be a need for a SOC, to be honest. It's one of the reasons why I think it's such an important area is because at the end of the day, we miss things, right? We're not always going to be able to rely on prevention, even if we have AI. Attackers are going to find their way around AI like they do with any other technology. And so I'm here for my SOC people. But I do think that I love the idea and the premise of like making security feel a little bit more human with AI if we can. And I think that that's a good example where like you could feasibly have it talk to the end users and say like, not an ideal use of your time to be putting your social security number in here. Probably going to end up with bad results. And to be able to kind of preempt some of this behavior in a way that isn't just an outright deny, but is a explainer for why you should probably be outright denying that activity.
Just-in-time security awareness, something like
that. Just-in-time security awareness. It's cute.
I want a Clippy, but it's like Brian Krebs, and he tells me all the dumb things I'm doing and not to hard code like anything into my Python, and like that's what I want.
Okay, you know how they always make the AI into like women? I actually think that it's so much cuter when they make them into animals. Like, have you seen Otter AI where it just is like your little buddy that shows up to like transcribe your call? How cute is that? I think that's so much better.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm here for the little animal. I don't know what our animal would be.
Women care about design. So my husband now.
Duo was the last company I saw that like really put time into UI and UX and like made it fun. Right.
Yeah. My husband right now in his smart glasses, John Cena is the person who talks to him.
That's so funny.
And every now and then I can hear it, and I'm like, what? But I can't.
Mine
see
is
him.
Mine is Key from Key and Peele.
Nice.
It doesn't sound exactly like them though. Like you can tell it's like an AI trained on their voice or something like that. But
I think you can use Aquafina too, which I think is going to be
Oh
my
my God,
next
that's
selection.
great. That's so good.
So I blanked on where I was going to go from here. But yeah, speaking of, we should probably shift to the next topic here, which, speaking of quality assurance and transparency, for people that aren't aware of them, maybe give like a quick overview of what the MITRE EDR evaluations are.
Yeah. So and please forgive me, this name is a bit of a mouthful. The MITRE Ingenuity Attack Enterprise Evaluations are.
Excuse me for not saying the full name. I would not have remembered that.
I have only remember it because I have to type it constantly whenever I'm doing research.
You've been living and breathing it. Yeah.
Yeah. They are a series of evaluations which have been going on for about, I think, 6 years now. Maybe a little 5 or 6 years now. And they evaluate enterprise security tools. And it's interesting because it started out as just the enterprise evaluations, but they've expanded it into having services evaluations and potentially other evaluations down the road. And they're not specific to EDR, although EDR vendors are the ones that are most likely to participate. But there have, interestingly enough, been SIM vendors that have participated in previous years, which I think is pretty cool because, of course, we want to see what those technologies are capable of as well, if they can participate. But ultimately, what it does is the MITRE team comes in and says, hey, we want to test your technology, and we are going to basically simulate attacker activity and see what your tool is capable of seeing along the entire chain of attacker activity. And the MITRE Ingenuity team is very well positioned to do this because, of course, they are responsible for the MITRE attack framework, which gives us a better understanding of attacker activity and even maps that to specific attackers. So they can actually go through and say, here's a real example of an attack that an adversary uses. Let's see how your technology stands up to it, and let's see what your technology can see. And they do this both for detections and now for prevention behaviors, and blocking is what they end up calling it, to see, can they not only have visibility into the entirety of the attack chain, or however much is possible, but can they also block some aspects of the attacker activity, which has been really cool. So in this latest round of evaluations, they had a couple of different simulations that they did and emulations of attacker activity. And they have every year changed around some of what they provide to the public. Because one of the reasons why I love these evaluations so much is because every year they give out all of the data. You can just download the data from their website of exactly what each of these vendors saw. They also even now publish screenshots of what the vendors output to them, which is pretty cool because it gives you a good sense of what it will look like in the actual platform. A good number of vendors typically participate in these, like I said, typically EDR vendors, but some SIM vendors as well. And with the output, I like to play around with the data. I actually spend a couple of days, if not a couple of weeks, looking at the data, trying to figure out what can we take away from this. Because I will say it is kind of challenging, right? When you look at the data, it is not entirely clear how you should be evaluating it. MITRE does not do a ranking system. They don't try to say this vendor is the best. They give you the data and they say, use this how you see fit when you're thinking about the vendors that you're choosing. So I try to do that work for our clients so that they can not have to worry about figuring it all out, but they still have access to the data and have some insights from it.
So I built product reviews for Cyber Risk Alliance, which is the same company that owns this podcast, a couple years back in 2020. And this is something I've been thinking about ever since I became an analyst. When Wendy Nather hired me, one of my first questions was, how much hands-on time do we get with products in this role? And of course, the answer is not much, if any, because you want to cover as much of the market as you can. And if you're building a lab and testing products and stuff like that, you basically have to trust PowerPoints, right? During briefings, that's a lot of it. you verify what you can, but and when I built them, I spent a lot of time looking at what NSS Labs was doing and some of these other companies. I just didn't see a whole lot of value in, this AV can stop 200 malwares. This one can stop 180, because it just seems very subjective. Like that can change from 1 month to the next based on how good their research teams are, I guess, or, what they happen to be focused on any given day. Like maybe one of these vendors has hyper focused on CLOP or one particular adversary group, and so what I focused on was like, what's it like to get this thing up and running? How much effort is it going to take me to bring this thing into the organization, roll it out, get it to where it's producing some kind of value, and then keep it there? Like, how many hours per month do I need to hire 2 people to manage this thing? And when I was looking at the methodology here, and the first step was vendor comes in and sets up the product, it kind of turned me off. I was like, okay, like I'm sure they can set it up. And do they know who they're setting it up for? Like which threat actors beforehand?
It depends on which evaluation you're talking about. In some cases, they had a kind of open book test. In others, they do not. I don't believe that they had an open book test for this. They certainly didn't know the tactics or techniques that were going to be used for this one.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree completely. So one of my research agenda things for this year was examining the actual ROI on paid professional services, because my thesis is that all SIM and SOAR and XD, all of these analytics platform providers should be including a lot of professional services hours with the first contract. While it may make the customer less profitable, if you're looking at somewhere between 30 and 40% of SIM stand-ups failing, it's going to be a lot easier to eat a bunch of professional services hours to get that thing deployed properly than to eat a bunch of services hour or support hours when it's not, and have it, misconfigured. So yeah, I agree with Adrian that a lot of times it's not the tool itself, it's how easy or difficult it is to set it up. And I always find vendor demos somewhat useless, and that it's great to see the UI, but your sample data that's been, sanitized to work with your demo is not representative of some guy who manages security at a gas station chain trying to deploy a SIM.
Yeah, and I completely agree as well. Like when I talk about this with users, I often break it down into capabilities, dependencies, and time to value. So anytime someone is evaluating a tool, what do they want it to do? What's it going to take to make it work? And how quickly are they going to get it up and running? And whenever I talk to vendors about this, we spend all the time on capabilities. Whenever I talk to users, we spend all the time on dependencies. How many people is it going to take to use it? What training is available? How are you going to deploy it? Like that's what decides what technology they can go with. And so I completely agree on that front. I do think that the thing for me as an analyst, because I'm totally with you, like I don't get to work hands-on in the products anymore like I used to, is I really love the MITRE evaluations because it is kind of filling the gap that I have, right? These evaluations are at least giving some time in the tool. And like, I mean, if you look at any of my waves, right, with the screenshots and everything, if you look at my waves, the thing that I really do put a lot of focus on is what is the strategy? What services do they have? What training do they have? Like a lot of companies, they want to make sure that the training is high quality. We actually have data that shows that CISOs look at that pretty significantly before they buy a tool. And so if you don't have a good training, then you're in a very difficult spot. And that was one of the things with this latest round of evaluations was they introduced alert volume and tracking alert volume. And that was very cool because even though they're not about evaluating user experience for these vendors, I am. And so even if all of those alerts are accurate and they're true positives, who wants to look at 1 million alerts for one attack or 3 attacks? Like that doesn't make any sense. We can't. We cannot.
It increases the total cost of ownership for that tool as well, right? Because you might pay a little bit less than a competitor, but if your team gets so bogged in alerts that they can't respond, that's a back end cost you probably haven't accounted for.
Well, even when you consider, like one of the things that we did was, of course, there's the cost of just burning out your employees, right? But there's also the cost of like, what do most people do with the alerts that are generated in EDR, right? They send them to the SIM for additional correlation. You're flooding the zone with 1 million alerts. It's going to cost you a lot of money to keep all those alerts in. Now, and everybody wants to reduce their SIM costs, right? So you're not helping that problem. Now, the vendors kind of push back on this and say, okay, well, only the high and critical alerts are the ones that actually get surfaced. Even still, for some of the vendors, it was in the thousands of alerts. That's way too many.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I often talk about this kind of like red flag and yellow flag concept of like it's so hard to let go of the maybe this could be bad, right? Like with certain context or like thinking of it from like a law enforcement perspective, it's like having a tool that tells you all the bad things that are going on, and you didn't see the 6 murders because there was 1 million people jaywalking, right? Like.
It's the NSA
you got to have some way to tune that stuff out.
100%.
All right. So you do have some, you just published some stuff day before yesterday, something like that?
Yeah. Yesterday, we actually because of how much data there was, we made 3 different reports. One was a cost calculator looking at the cost from a SIM perspective. One is just an overview of the evaluations and what's changed. And then the other one is a representation of a lot of the data just to make it more easy to digest. So it was really fun to do.
I love it. And we do have, I believe it's the 3rd link in the show notes here. You can go, that'll take you where you can see all that stuff that they've published. And Allie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great.
All right. Stick with us. We'll be back in just a few moments with the weekly enterprise news.